Good morning, everyone. As the room gets populated with all those folks signing on, we'll get started in just a moment or two. I'm Tom Wickman. I'm the Assistant Director of the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program and the statewide GIBMP Coordinator. Today, we've got a great presentation for you, so I'm really excited. Before we get started, while you're waiting, if you'd like to enter in the chat maybe where you're from and what's your favorite thing about ornamental grasses? Might be kind of fun to learn. So, and we'll get started in just a minute or two. I see we have South Florida and Central Florida chiming in. Mike, I love muley grass as well.
Same. It's always good to see South Florida represented. Venice, hello, Mike. See a lot of familiar names in the chat. Good to see everybody.
Fall blooms, I love that. Not having to mow, that's a really nice point. Lake County loves all the grasses. Nice. Okay, with that, I think most of the people have entered the room and have signed on. So we'll go ahead and go through just a few tidbits of information here. Welcome to our Florida Friendly Landscaping Professional Webinar Series. Today's webinar is Get Your Grasses Growing, Ornamental Grass Selection, Use and Care with Erin Alvarez. She'll provide some guidance on how to select and use these versatile landscape plants. This webinar is approved for one FNGLA, LIF, DBPR, and FDAX CEU. There's a $10 administration fee to receive a certificate for continuing education. I'll put a link in the chat box to make payment for certificate if you have not already done so. We will submit the CEUs for licensing tomorrow, so make sure that if you want the CEU to make payment by the end of the day today. This is part of a monthly webinar series held on the second Tuesday of every month at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. Our next webinar is September 12th, and it's Dealing with Critters in the Landscape with Dr. Bill Kern. There'll also be a Green Stormwater Infrastructure Design Techniques webinar on August 17th from 11 to 12:30 Eastern Time. More details can be found on our website. Your microphones have been muted. Please put your questions into the chat box and we'll take them at the end of the presentation. Also, you'll see a survey invitation pop up. If you can, please take a moment to fill this out. It really helps us determine what educational programs to offer each month, and we're already planning for next year, so it's really important that we get your feedback on that. With that, it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker. Erin Alvarez is a lecturer in the University of Florida Environmental Horticulture Department with a 100% teaching appointment. Her award-winning teaching programs are supported by her landscape horticulture industry background and a focus on student-centered, active learning, and professional development. Erin is currently the instructor for regular offerings of online and in-person plant propagation lecture and lab, landscape and nursery certification courses, public gardens management lecture and lab, and the plant science program's practical work experience and capstone courses. In addition to formal teaching responsibilities, Erin is a faculty member for the plant science program, advises the Environmental Horticulture Club, and coaches the landscape team. She regularly hosts plant propagation and professional development workshops for students, as well as field trips and site visits to landscape and nursery operations and research sites. Erin's an amazing horticulturist, and she has a real passion and love for plants and for teaching as well. And I think she's really going to help you figure out how to use these plants more effectively, which I think are very much underutilized. With that, I'll turn the mic over to my good friend and colleague, Erin Alvarez.
Oh, thank you so much, Tom. That was a great introduction. And you know me well. I've known Tom for a long time, despite Mike's comment in the chat that I'm too young for gray. Thank you, Mike. I've been doing this since, the 19s. So I'm very happy to be here with y'all. Thank you, FFL. Thank you, Tom and Claire and everyone for inviting me here. And thank you all for attending. I'm really excited to see everyone on the participants list. I would love to apologize for my long introduction. That's for me, but I do a lot for the department, and my background is in landscape management, design, contracting. Before I was at the University of Florida, I did that to support myself through school and worked in the industry briefly, managing retail garden centers, doing landscape designs. And then I was fortunate enough to come back and work mostly with extension and teaching with Florida Friendly Master Gardener and Tom in the Environmental Horticulture Department. I also have taught for agronomy. We've done foodscaping. I'm currently teaching in environmental horticulture, as Tom mentioned, doing propagation. As you can hear, most of my experience currently is with students, but my heart, my background, my training, my interest still lies very much with the industry. And a big part of my teaching program now is to prepare students for their future employment or endeavors. Some of that's in the green industry, some of that's in research, some students go on to do their own thing. But at the heart of it all, I try to give students a functional foundation, and that really is the background of my approach to landscape management too. So as we're going to talk about ornamental grasses today, I'm going to try to give you all a very practical overview of how to use ornamental grasses. I'm going to ask y'all a couple questions, and I love the chat engagement, so please keep asking questions. We're going to do a question session at the end, but if you have something quick there, or if you need a point of clarification during the talk, please pop it in the chat, and I'll be happy to address it either in real time or at the end. So what we're going to talk about today is ornamental grasses, and we titled this talk, Get Your Grasses Growing. And one of the things that I love about grasses, like a lot of y'all mentioned, is their versatility. And I'm going to give y'all some overview, an overview of some typical grasses, but I really want to talk about, as Tom mentioned, how to use grasses in the landscape. Has anyone experienced a misconception or found out something maybe that surprised them about ornamental grasses and their experience using them? If you have, feel free to put a surprising fact or something you didn't know about that you learned in the chat. And then I hope by the end of my talk, everyone will have something to say in response to that question. You can see in the image here on my first slide, we've got a nice close-up of a lemongrass. This is a grass, hopefully y'all are familiar with it. A lot of people think of it as an herb or medicinal plant. It's a fantastic ornamental grass. There's some anecdotal talk of it repelling mosquitoes. I don't have the research on that, but if nothing else, it's beautiful and it smells good. We also have an old favorite here that's underutilized to the right, the picture that's more at a distance. That's vetiver, which is a grass that's traditionally used for stormwater, erosion control, bank stabilization. It's also an herb and medicinal plant in some areas, and it's a gorgeous ornamental. So I wanted to put two plants that aren't the typical ornamental grasses that we often think about. A lot of us think of muley. I will admit that's the first, that was weird with the virtual surprise hand. That's the first grass I often think of when I think of ornamental grasses, because it's a postcard plant for Florida. But there are so many other grasses and so many other places where we can use grasses. So where we're going today, I just want to give y'all a little overview. I'm going to introduce ornamental grasses, talk about their traits, their features. We're going to go through different types of ornamental grasses briefly, talk about their culture and their selection. And when I say culture, I mean what they need to grow, how we use them, the culture in horticulture, right? So how we can produce them, how we grow them, what they need, and what their requirements are so that we know how to implement an appropriate maintenance plan. If I had $1 for every time someone told me that grasses were low maintenance or no maintenance, you could just plant them and forget them, I'd be buying you all lunch probably. But that's not always the case. It is the case for a vast majority of grasses, but as we'll see today, sometimes maintenance can be a heftier bill than we realize. And then at the end of it, I hope you'll be able to take your pick. I'm going to ask you in a few minutes to think of an ornamental grass that you like, or picture something when I say ornamental grass. And if you're like me, there were a couple that maybe came to mind before you knew much about ornamental grasses. But as I mentioned, by the end of this, hopefully we'll have a wider variety. So take a minute and do me a favor and check the chat to pay for your CEUs. And then also pop into the chat and tell me, when you think of an ornamental grass, what comes to mind? You can name a grass, you can do free association. It doesn't have to be your favorite thing. It doesn't have to be a good thing. It can be something else. But just any word. It might be a memory, might be a place, might be a name. Go ahead and put that in the chat, please. Mondo, great. Purple fountain grass, no other mound. Yes, design combinations. Love it. Golf course, liriope, or liriope, as my old boss in Atlanta used to say. Muley and Fakahatchee, great. Lemongrass, yes. Peanut grass, yes. Perennial peanut. We're talking about grass substitutes. We'll talk about that. Adagio in the fall, beautiful. Prune to stubbles, yes, Doris. That is we'll talk about that too. That's a maintenance concern. Love grass, Spartina, bunny tails. I love bunny tails. Sea grasses, y'all have some great associations. Trying to grow lemongrass, but my dogs keep eating it. My dogs and cats eat mine too. Gammon Fakahatchee, texture, low maintenance, cotton candy. The sound of the wind, getting that sensory component in there. Yes, grasses are fantastic for sensory. We'll talk about that as well. Native aesthetic, absolutely. Some great associations here, y'all. So I'm going to click through. Tropical look, nice movement. Red fountain grass, wonderful. Muley. I'm going to pause for a sip of coffee while y'all are. Muley by the waterfall, yes. Those combinations of sight cues like water and movement and texture. So no one has mentioned, which I'm relieved to find, hiding places for rabbits, yes, and all kinds of wildlife. We'll talk about that too. So did anybody think of this? The picture I just put up on the slide here, and maybe didn't want to say it. This is our friend Cortaderia Siloana. Yeah, boo, right? Boo. Rats. Yes, Mike, we'll talk about wildlife and grass interactions here in a minute. Absolutely. So this image here, Cortaderia Siloana, also known as pampas grass, or pampas grass, is an invasive, overused, old favorite. I think it was really popular 70s and 80s landscape design. I grew up looking at the plumes of this in my grandmother's living room, right? Because she had some in a vase that were dried and they were some color. I don't even remember what, I think burnt orange. But this is what a lot of people think of when they think of ornamental grasses. And I put this up because it really highlights a lot of the less than desirable things about grasses, right? Too big, thuggish, difficult to get rid of once you have it. Mean, they cut. The leaves are very sharp. They're serrated on the edges. And I had a nasty experience with one of these on crutches one time when I was tripped up as a teenager. And so I had an early negative experience with this grass. But they were used, and they were used everywhere. So people really got tired of seeing them. This is invasive. Don't plant it. Even if it wasn't invasive, you probably wouldn't want to plant it, right? Because it's not appropriate for many sites in a residential landscape. In its native range, it's gorgeous, right? It's really pretty. It has attractive plumes. The foliage is consistent. It's evergreen, but it's not a great grass. And so a lot of folks' associations aren't necessarily positive with grasses. I tend to think of things like this. This is Mondo grass, Ophiopogon, Lamandra breeze. Yes, in the chat, somebody mentioned Lamandra. That has a very similar texture to this. I think of fine textured, soft, able to use them in a design. This is a labyrinth at Kanapaha. And that's my son in the picture. I'm not using somebody else's kid in my presentation. But grass sometimes can be very, evocative of a particular design aesthetic, right? Someone mentioned native aesthetic. Well, this is more of a formal, almost Asian influenced aesthetic. It has a very peaceful look to the eye. You can do surprisingly structured things with it, as opposed to thinking of grasses as being kind of unstructured and loose. But there are different things that come to mind when we think of ornamental grasses. I think of really fancy, showy foliage, which may be surprising when you think of grasses. A lot of us don't think of showy, attractive leaves other than just the grass itself making a statement. But this is one of the miscanthus that has the variegated horizontal stripes across the leaf blade. So there's different ones. Some are gold bar, some are tiger stripe. I can't remember this one. I think it might be gold bar. But these are, some variety in ornamental grasses. These provide great design impact when you're looking at either container gardening, planting a border, trying to get some interest in a formal landscape. And this grass was at a botanical garden right along a path, front and center, for accent. Some of you may have thought something more along the lines of this when you thought of ornamental grasses. Maintenance headaches. This is another thing that comes to mind when I think of grasses. Things hiding in them that people don't want to see when they walk out their front yard. When I was in extension down in Sarasota County, we used to get a lot of folks call asking about snakes and rats and grasses attracting things like that. Well, honestly, snakes are going to go where they go. I've seen as many snakes on a bush or a shrub or a tree as I have in the grass. But we tend to hear things, lizards sound a lot bigger than they are when they're in a grass. So there are a lot of potential downsides to having ornamental grasses, one of which isn't necessarily wildlife, but if they're not maintained properly, they can be overwhelmed by surrounding plants, even when they're desirable. Here in this image, the image on the right side, that's Passiflora, our native passion flower. That's just volunteering all over. I think these are African iris, I believe, and there's some Liriope being eaten in there. So maintenance can be a headache. They're not plant and forget it type of plants always. This grass on the left is a very sad vetiver clump that was overrun by Bidens in need of division. No one ever divided it, and it gradually was overtaken by annual weeds. And so again, grasses aren't zero maintenance. You don't plant them and run away, but they can do a lot of really amazing things. Some other aspects of native or of ornamental grasses that some folks think of, no one mentioned this, and thank you again for that, but invasives. A lot of our grasses that are invaders, or excuse me, a lot of our really problematic invasive plants are grasses. And many grasses that were brought in as ornamentals became invasive. Kogan grass is a classic example. That's the image there to the right with kind of red blades. This was, I'll tell y'all, not a secret, but it's not my favorite fact, but it goes to show you how invasive plants sometimes are introduced. This was one of my favorite ornamental grasses when I first started learning about ornamental grasses. I picked up this book, which I'll mention. Oh, you can't see it because of the blurred background. Oh, there you go. I've got a citation to it at the end of my talk. It's Rick Dark's Pocket Guide to Ornamental Grasses. And one of the first pictures I saw was a grass they called Japanese bloodgrass because it had these gorgeous red leaves. Well, that's Imperatus cylindrica, which is our invasive Kogan grass. And then we know things like Johnson grass, Napier grass, elephant grass, torpedo grass are all invasive, really problematic in the maintained landscape and in our natural areas. But we're going to talk about ornamentals, ones you want to plant, plants that tend to do well in our managed landscapes, not weeds. So let's do some fast facts about grasses, first of all. One fast fact is that not all grasses will work everywhere, right? So a lot of people will say, oh, it's a difficult spot. And I used to hear this a lot in my design life. Oh, it's a problematic area. Just put some ornamental grass or put some turf grass. No, they should not be default plants. You always need to consider, and I know y'all know this, but say it with me. FFL principle number 1, right plant, right place, right? Always, even and especially with ornamental grasses. Because grasses are variable. They run the gamut when it comes to plant needs and traits and types. They are all monocots. They're all going to be soft tissue. They're not going to become woody typically. However, they have a lot of variability across what they're like. Does anyone recognize the plant in this picture here? If you're from the north, you've probably seen it. Or if you visited up north, anybody in the chat want to say what that is? Anybody recognize it? It's an iconic grass in northern botanical gardens, containers. It's beautiful. I'm going to butcher the botanical name. Looks like a carex, yes, and carex is one that we can grow here that does well. It's Hakonocloa. It's a mounding grass, Japanese mounding grass. It will not grow here. It grows great as an annual. Up north, it's a perennial, but you can do it kind of as a winter annual here, but it usually peters out as soon as our nights get warm, unless you're in North Florida. So not all grasses are going to be the same, right? There's a ton of grasses that are beautiful up north that are either problems here or they just won't grow because they can't take our heat or our humidity. However, there is a good choice for just about any Florida landscape. Remembering right plant, right place. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. We'll talk about more about all this in a moment. There's annuals and perennials. We have some grasses that are just annual grasses, like our ornamental red fountain grass, which is also invasive in some areas. Ryegrass is another classic example of an annual. A grass planted out of place where you know it's not going to perennialize, but it'll look fine for a few months. That's great. Use it as an annual as long as it's non-invasive. Many of our grasses are perennials. They'll just come back year after year until they reach the end of their lifespan. We have both clumping, nice polite, they form a clump forms, and creeping. And I didn't add and sprinting because some grasses will creep to form a nice tidy clump. If you think of a clumping bamboo, those are really creepers, not like Minecraft or creepers, but they will creep slowly to form a large clump. Some grasses, however, similar to running bamboos, will run or sprint and form a large clump. Most of our ornamentals are not selected, or that trait hasn't been, they don't have that trait, or they wouldn't have been selected as ornamentals, but there are a few that will either revert or they can take off on you. And a lot of those, again, are invasives. Grasses have all season interest, even if it's an annual, except for an annual when it's not there. If there's a season, it's gone. But even after the end of their lifespan, the foliage typically will provide you with a lot of landscape interest, even if it's in a container. Not all of them do this. Some of them, I'll be honest, just look downright ragged, and you don't want them in the landscape once they've gone dormant. However, a lot of them are gorgeous. And even if they're brown, they still provide a really interesting architectural element. Some other fast facts. They provide ecosystem services. What do I mean by ecosystem services? Well, just as the name implies, they do things for the ecosystem. So this might relate to wildlife, to people, to soil and water quality, to climate or temperature, to provide microclimates. Grasses do a lot more than people realize beyond just basic soil stabilization, if you think of grasses being planted on retention areas. They're incredibly important pollinator plants and also plants for wildlife refuge, especially over winter when we think of some of our insects and other critters. They also provide nutrient mitigation sometimes, or nutrient remediation in soil. Often they will help with stormwater, slowing stormwater, especially in places like bioswales. And again, they do stabilize that soil. Some grasses, especially the ones that go dormant, and even the ones that don't, but just shed biomass, also enrich soil by contributing biomass, compostable material to the soil. So if you have really poor soil, grasses often can come in with that low fertility need and low water requirement need, but then in turn enrich the soil as they degrade and live out their lifespan. And so this is one instance where maybe not a cover crop, but grasses can often be used as a way to kind of bridge a gap between a really poor site, put in some grasses, mulch, water, and then you might have better soil after a few years. That being said, their traits are wide ranging. We'll talk a lot about that, but anything you can think of that's a plant trait, just about, there's going to be variability when it comes to ornamental grasses. Size, texture. When I say texture, I mean the visual design texture and also how it feels physically. The colors, both of the flowers and the leaves, and the form. Some are more upright, some are more low and spreading, some are very vase shaped, others are kind of, more wide. They also have wide ranging site requirements. So everything you can think of, from drought to wet feet to standing water, sun to shade, low to high fertility, there's going to be a grass that will probably fit the bill. So that when I was coming up, I did my graduate work on ornamental grasses. And one of the things we were trying to quantify was what the maintenance needs are of ornamental grasses that are native versus non-native grasses. Because I don't know about y'all, but I still hear it. I heard quite a bit back then and still a bit today. Oh, well, it's an ornamental grass, just plant a native, it'll be low maintenance and you'll be fine. Well, we didn't have any data on that other than common sense, right? Which would lead you to believe that. And also some anecdotal data from folks who would use grasses in restoration landscapes and things like that. Well, one thing to consider is most of our typical landscapes are not native. They're reconstructed, they're disrupted. As y'all know, they don't look anything like typically the native, the undisturbed landscape in the surrounding area. So native grasses aren't always going to work. Sometimes they can't handle the variability, or maybe they need a particular friend in the soil that they're not getting from our managed landscapes. So those maintenance needs are very wide ranging. What may be low or zero maintenance out at my state park down the road, Payne's Prairie, might be a goner in my yard just because of that difference in maintenance. So don't be fooled thinking a native can make it in a managed landscape and vice versa. And I know y'all have seen this, but I always like to mention it, especially when I talk about grasses. Because a lot of times people will assume that some of our gorgeous natives that are great plants, many of them do fine in managed landscapes, but sometimes they need a little bit different requirements. Okay, let's talk about types and traits of grasses. So we went through and looked at all their different kind of characteristics, what the different criteria are, or excuse me, big kind of features are. Now we'll get a little bit more specific about the different types and traits of grasses. These two images here feature similar grasses. We've got a kind of relatively new planting. There's some ornamental purple millet here that was at the Epcot Flower and Garden Festival. And then we have a big old Queen Caroline ornamental grass over here. This is at Selby Gardens recently. And this bed, you can tell it's kind of getting to the end of summer. They're probably about to switch this out. But I loved that you could see the mature size of this grass. Because even though these aren't the same grasses, these are two different types of purple attractive ornamental grasses, there's something that happens when we plant our grasses that we don't always think about, right? So I've seen a lot of folks use millet as an ornamental grass. Maybe it pops up at the bottom of your bird feeder, maybe you buy it, and it may reseed, right? Depending on the variety, maybe it doesn't set seed, maybe it's sterile, maybe it does. This might create a maintenance issue. This is about as tall as this plant is going to get, about 3 to 4 feet, might get a little bit taller, but that's about all it's going to do. This Queen Caroline grass is often sold, in a little 1 gallon or 3 gallon container, and it's very difficult to tell from the photo, or maybe, I don't know. I couldn't get a friend to stand in the photo with me for scale, but I went up and stood next to these just so I could show y'all in the picture, and my head is about a foot below the top canopy of that grass. So, and I'm 5'10", 5'11". So those grasses are a solid 6.5, 7 feet tall, maybe 8. And that's something that these designers obviously planned for. They put them in a great location. They're in front of a large evergreen hedge. They've broken up that large, strip of shrubbery. They've underplanted with some variable pollinator kind of cottage garden plants. You can't see, but it goes really nicely with the site. There's other kind of perennial border plants on the other side of this area. So it's done well. However, a homeowner or someone who may not know as much about how to manage these grasses might assume once you plant it, oh, they're going to get about 3 to 4 feet tall. And I've seen a ton of areas where this Queen Caroline grass is used and it's way too big for the site and they've left it in too long. So either plan for the mature size, plan to take it out, or find one that's going to do better, just like any other shrub for your site. So these types and traits that we discussed, these things to consider, here's just kind of a summary. Again, is it an annual or is it a perennial? Is it going to come back for you year after year, or is it just going to be done? And this may be less about how the grass wants to grow and more about how you use it, right? As landscape managers and designers, we can absolutely decide if it's part of our maintenance plan to use perennials as annuals. It's not terribly sustainable, but sometimes it's a lot more sustainable than trying to keep a plant going beyond its lifespan with pesticides or maintenance inputs. So you can take your pick there on what's best for your site. Similarly, many of our grasses are evergreen. So consider, are you going to have that year-round green foliage interest, or is it going to be deciduous and die back on you? We've got warm and cool season grasses, just like our turf grasses. So some do great all year round. Some of the annuals are best in the winter versus annuals that might be better in the summertime. When we talk about grasses, obviously, you're not going to have a lot of new growth, showy new growth, right? Or things we might get from shrubs or trees. But we do still have that seasonal variation. So in the spring, the regrowth occurs. If it's deciduous or if it's evergreen, it'll flush out. And then depending on when it flowers, we'll have flowers typically anywhere from late spring into fall through winter, depending on the grass. That form and habit is going to vary. So again, not all of them are that upright or that classic muley grass kind of rounded habit shape. Those Queen Caroline grasses that I just showed you tend to get really big and rangy. They look a little bit like giant Muppets to me, like those Sesame Street monsters. They get kind of top heavy, but they're still, gorgeous. They just have a very particular habit and form. As I mentioned, the clumping, creeping, running, how is it going to grow for you in the landscape? Is it going to stay put? Is it going to, take off? Do you need to contain it? Something like a equisetum or horsetail versus something like a spartina. Those cultural requirements we'll get into here in a moment. And then, as I mentioned, consider those ecosystem impacts. What is the value of that plant to the ecosystem? And then the counter to that, the other side of that coin, is what potential impact is it going to have on the ecosystem? So as we've seen with our invasive grasses, many of them can have adverse or negative impacts on our ecosystem. So being aware of what you're putting where, checking that IPIS assessment or the Center for Aquatic and Invasive Plant invasive list is always going to be a good idea if you're not sure what you're using. Okay, time for y'all to participate again. Everybody awake still? Are you with me? I would like you to pick a site, any site, that you think an ornamental grass, or you don't know if an ornamental grass would work, and I bet we can find a grass that works for that site. Sometimes I do this with students with different things, and they'll get real cute and be like, a cinder block, a place a plant might grow. But if you can think of a site, I bet we can think of an ornamental grass. So somebody put a site in the chat where we could put, maybe you don't think an ornamental grass will work. Dry and sandy, full sun all day, absolutely. Under heavy tree foliage, yes. We'll talk about what grasses will work. Wet, Top of the bank on a littoral shelf, yes. Littoral, I would say literal, littoral. Shadier locations between closer houses is a challenge. Absolutely, it is. That's a challenge for a few reasons, not just the shade. We'll talk about that. Bioswale under, oh, great locations, y'all. These are great places to put grasses. Open, windy, compacted soil, dry, sandy, shady, under oaks, heart shade, morning sun, hell strips. Yes, south facing hot bank. If y'all don't know hell strips, Greg defined it there for us. Thank you. The narrow medium strips next to sidewalks between two paved surfaces. Full all day sun, absolutely. Stopping soil erosion, yep, under oaks and other trees. We've got grasses for all these sites, y'all. So when you're thinking about problem solving, right, and I love this, a lot of y'all are thinking solving problems through design and plant selection. And this is really what we want with our sustainable landscapes, have them be functional as well as beautiful. But there's grasses for all of these. So dry, sandy, full sun, we've got our things like muley, spartina, if you've got a salty location, looking for those coastal salt plants. Wet locations, a lot of our grasses, again, are semi-aquatic or they can tolerate wet feet. So when you think about things like certain carex, ponds with erosion, where a tree stump has not been removed. Ooh, that's a good one, Veronica. Grasses tend to be very deep rooted, right? So as long as you can get some access to the soil there, sometimes they'll do okay. That nitrogen, that was what's going to get you. So yeah, we can put grasses for all these. So one area where a lot of folks don't think of putting grasses is in the shade. We tend to think of ornamental grasses as being sunny plants or sun-loving plants, but really many of them will grow great in the shade and they'll actually tolerate a little bit of moisture sometimes. So one great example is river oats, Chasmanthium latifolium. We'll talk about that here in a second. I've got it on my list at the end. Other plants like vetiver, fakahatchee grass will tolerate a variety of locations. So they might do all right in the sun, but not so great in the shade. Plants like spartina here can tolerate dry and wet. So during a rain event, like a bioswale or a littoral shelf, you might have them be inundated or flooded from water runoff or water retention. As the water recedes, they do fine. Grasses that tolerate both wet and dry conditions typically tend to also, not always, but often are also salt tolerant. So depending on the species you pick, sometimes you can find one that does both for you, but check, because not always. Also, managed versus natural areas, sun versus shade. A lot of our gardens, because of tree canopies, houses, buildings are going to have variable light. My river oats, my Chasmanthium is growing on the north side of my house. It gets zero direct sun, and it's in a runoff area, part of it from the roof. The other part's high and dry because it's on a little like walk up to the front door, and they do fine and they reseed. So a lot of times the grasses will let you know, obviously, just like any plant when they're happy. But knowing ahead of time what you can expect or where it might do well is obviously going to help you out. Someone mentioned, Jean Davis, forgive me if I said your name wrong, red fountain grass in open cinder blocks under neighbor's 3-story tree. In the cinder blocks along the swale, yeah, they'll grow just about anywhere. In cinder block containers, they'll do great with red fountain grass. One thing to think about is how grasses play a role and grass-like plants play a role with their friends, so with their landscape partners. So you can see in the photo to the right, this kind of formal garden, we've got some nice hardscape parterres here. We have grass-like plants with our cypress or sedge in the little pond. We have society garlic, Tulbagia, which isn't a grass, but it's a grass-like plant. We have some irisy looking things, and then some grasses that look like they're probably either just starting out, miscanthus maybe, or some dwarf fakahatchee. This is the beginning of the season. This is relatively, soon. It's not late summer when everything's tired. The grasses are going to change form and shape. But in a formal garden, they have that role to play where they might be able to start out relatively small, and then as other plants kind of fade away, they can take over as they reach their season. This photo on the left with the white blooms, I apologize, that should have been a full picture, but that's Eragrostis spectabilis in a container. So they also do really nicely a lot of times in containers as long as they're watered. Susan asked about mowing down muley grass. We will talk about that in just 1 second. That's a great question. Should you cut the grasses down? Once I do culture and selection, we'll do maintenance. So we'll get there, I promise. Culture and selection. I mentioned sunny, hot places. Shady wooded places too, plants like mondo grass. Again, some of those miscanthus will do really well in shady spots. The river oats, some of our other kind of more shade-loving fakahatchee, dwarf fakahatchee, occasionally do all right with a little bit of shade. But using grasses kind of in an unexpected way, a lot of folks wouldn't think of using a grass in a woodland setting, along with bromeliads and a fallen log, but you can. They do really well. The most important thing, obviously, like we've talked about, is knowing your site. So right plant, right place. You've got to get out and do a little bit of digging, searching, looking, evaluating of what site you're getting into. And then you can use those site criteria, obviously, to select your grass. I put screen caps of a couple great resources up here. I've got links and those mentioning at the end here. But one obviously is the Florida Friendly Plant List. There's a whole section. You just select ornamental grasses and then you can put in your site criteria and it'll spit out a list of what will work for your area. You don't even have to do any other research really, other than looking at your site. Dr. Mac Thetford has a great publication on EDIS that is about ornamental grasses, and and Mary Salinas. I knew there were two authors, Mac Thetford and Mary Salinas. And at the end, there are tables that talk about the height they get, the description, and the region they're best suited for. These don't have as detailed site criteria, but you can always cross-reference it against a book or another resource. But again, choose your fighter, choose your grass based on the fight they're going to be in. What site do you have? And also, in your site considerations, don't forget to think about the people, the human factor. What are the people going to be doing in that site? How is it going to be maintained? What are their expectations, etc. Is red fountain grass perennial in its native habitat? Yes. Here, usually not, but in South Florida, it may perennialize. I'm not 100% about in South Florida. If anybody knows, please put it in the chat. Okay, so when we're talking about culture and selection, as I mentioned, know your site characteristics, because this is going to tell you what grasses will do well. Always consider the mature size of the grass, unless you know you're going to be pulling it out because it's in a container or something like that, and you're not going to be using it as it reaches maturity. That being said, you should still know the growth rate, because even if you're not planning on using it for its entire lifespan, if it grows really quickly and you're only planning on having it, at a foot, you might end up with something larger than you anticipated. The Clifford, excuse me, grasses can be from 4 inches. I'm looking at you, Dwarf Mondo, 2 inches, 2.5. Up to 4 yards tall. Some are, 12, 15 feet tall. Those are really bordering more on the bamboo end of things, but a lot of them are still several grasses that fit that bill. So know the size. They're not all 2 to 3 feet. The width is going to be variable. Some are much more upright. Some are much more spreading. So again, know that width and height. You cannot prune grasses for size without them looking very silly. So if you enjoy that topiary kind of goofy, ornamental grass flat top look, go for it. But otherwise, you're not going to be able to prune them. I've had landscapers tell me that they can just root prune grasses to try to keep them skinny. Good luck. I have yet to have a maintenance crew I could budget effectively for that kind of work. So plan for that maintenance. Are you going to be cutting it back? Is it deciduous and you need to get rid of the foliage? Can you leave it there? Is it the type of grass that has to be divided every few years, or the center is going to die out, like some of our Fakahatchees or vetiver? And also plan for establishment time. I have had so many site visits where I go out to an HOA or someone's home and they've planted a ton of muley or spartina. And because plants are not inexpensive, they've started out with maybe a 4-inch, or hopefully not, but maybe a plug or even a 1 gallon. And a year or 2 years later, the grass is still kind of just sitting there. It's not really doing much. Well, grasses follow that perennial rule where, first year it crawls, second year, or first year it sits, second year it crawls, third year it, runs or walks, however you want to go. But the 3rd or 4th year is usually when our grasses are really going to take off and start doing what they do, as long as everything is right for them at the site. If they're not happy, if they aren't getting the right water or soil requirements or light, they may never thrive. So again, plan for your establishment time so that is my grass going to look good in a year, or is it going to look better maybe in 4 years, so that you can plan again for that maintenance and design expectation. One thing that I did want to mention on this slide, the white grass here, does anybody recognize that one? This is a little bit of a trick. If you get it, you get a gold star. So yes, thank you, Mike. So that's white muley grass. I had a client, yes, Guy, thank you, muley grass. Good job, y'all. That is a white variety of muley. A lot of folks have seen it, but I still meet folks who are surprised by this. And I had a nursery professional who contacted me, oh gosh, a long time ago now, but they had been sold a mixed batch. And until they flower, there was really no way to know, as far as I could tell, whether they had white or pink. So they had a fun sale that season on their muley grass. But again, knowing your characteristics, knowing your plant itself, and planning again for that maintenance. This is a stand of vetiver, the photo on the right, that was out at the tree unit, and it was planted too closely to other plants intentionally, so we could show how it grows. You know, even an ornamental grass can grow into and kind of be a little bit aggressive in a planted landscape. I mentioned considering flowering time. Most of our ornamental grasses in Florida are going to are going to flower, not so much in the spring, although a few will. Most of them really get going in summer to fall. There's almost always going to be some kind of fall or winter color and interest, whether it's the spent flower heads, seed heads, the foliage itself as it's going dormant. Many of them, when the seasons start to change, whether it's through light or temperature, will change color. So they might turn bronze or reddish, and that's really attractive for some landscapes. Some folks hate the look of winterized grasses, of dead, dormant foliage. They want it cut down. We'll talk about whether you should do that and why in a minute, but it is also an attractive trait for some people. One thing to consider is timing your deciduous regrowth. So when you're picking your ornamental grasses, as I mentioned before, especially if it's in a mixed bed, plan on when it's going to regrow so that you can consider what you're planting around it. This is a great thing to interplant with deciduous perennials that might have different seasonality, or bulbs, things that you know are going to be popping up when the grass might be dormant or not as showy. Also plan for salt exposure, right? And so a lot of folks, if you're right on the water, obvious, this is a thing, but some grasses can be very sensitive to salt spray, even a mile or so inland. Well, maybe not a mile, but many hundreds of yards inland, depending on the wind, maybe a mile, and also to irrigation salt. So if your grass isn't doing well, if you've got reclaimed water that's extra salty, or there might be intrusion, if you have a well or something like that, grasses can be very susceptible to that. This is the same general site at Selby Gardens, these two photos in this image. I was just there a couple weeks ago, so I took pictures, and they do a great job with ornamental grasses, so it was neat to see. But you can see the ones closer to the coast, Fakahatchee, aren't quite so happy, and the ones that are a little more inland and protected are doing great. And that's just, you know, they've been buffeted literally almost to death. My Fakahatchee grass currently in my yard doesn't get any water, just because I like to see how it does. I don't fertilize it, and it looks a lot more like the ones here in the top photo, and there's no salt exposure. So salt, maintenance, irrigation can make all the difference. Physical abuse, my kid likes to smack the blades on my grass. Availability is another consideration. So no matter how much you love a grass, and I'll talk about one of my favorites here in a minute, sometimes you just can't find it. We used to do trial gardens at the University of Florida in Gainesville. Now you can find these at other sites like Epcot, down in South Florida at Costa Farms. Many extension offices, Orange County Extension has a great trial garden. And you can see how the grasses do. It's a great way to go and look at what growers are considering for ornamental grasses. I put this photo up here because for two reasons. One, for me, my eye is immediately drawn to the grass in the foreground because I'm like, oh, that's different. It's a little bit different texture, something that catches my eye with all these beautiful flowers around it. The second is that even with all of these other floral interest plants, we still had growers testing ornamental grasses in our trial gardens. So these are still really showy, valuable, important floriculture and landscape plants, whether you're a homeowner or a maintenance professional or a breeder or a grower. Okay, let's talk about maintenance. And this will go relatively quickly because the biggest thing to think about a lot of times with ornamental grasses and maintenance is pruning. They really don't need a whole lot of other attention, and there's just not a lot of other things to consider if they're in the right place. So pruning is optional. It is not required. I'm going to pause and wait for the angry chat messages to come in. You do not have to prune your ornamental grasses. No, I don't see any pitchforks. Yeah, you can just leave them. You can. I have been on the job. I have done landscape maintenance. I have had clients. I have been a client. There are some times when you just have to prune it. People don't want to look at it. They don't want to think about the snakes that they think imagine are nowhere in there. They don't want to deal with, you know, any of it. They think it looks neater. They think it's going to make a better regrowth. So some of these are based in facts, right? And thank y'all for contributing to the chat. Yes, these are great questions. So a lot of times when we prune grasses, and you can see here in the image that I have on the slide, we've got some deciduous dormant grasses that just look like little, you know, hay stalks. This is very common up north for grass beds. Down below, I apologize, it's a little pixelated. This is at our trial gardens. And so you can see just evergreen grass has been pruned back, has been cut back. There's a couple of reasons to prune grasses that are, well, there's many reasons that are great reasons. If you just like it better, that's fine, but you don't have to. The idea that grasses grow back more uniformly or thickly or heartily if you prune them back is technically not 100% true. When grasses grow, they are going to grow at the crown or the base of the plant. So for some grasses, that's underground, just under the planting surface, kind of near where the roots start to emerge. For other grasses, that's going to be a little bit higher up, but it's almost always going to be all those meristems, those growing points for the grass, is going to be in the very center bottom of that grass. So if my hand is, grass foliage, this is where the grass growing point is going to be. When we cut it, it's not like trimming a tree or a shrub where when you cut it, you're stimulating regrowth further down the branch. They don't branch that way, they're monocots. So the growth is all going to come from that base. When we cut it back and we see nothing but green, beautiful leaves where before there was some brown and it was like weird and it was inconsistent, we've just made it more uniform. You're basically wiping a clean slate and then writing on it so that everything you've written is now a lot shinier and easier to see. That green new growth is shinier and easier to see when we've pruned back last year's dead growth. That is a lot of times the origin of that idea of it looks more uniform, it looks thicker, it looks more flush if you cut it back. Some grasses have natural ecosystems where they burn down regularly, or animals come and forage through them. And so that dead growth is naturally removed. And after many, many years, if you don't rake it or prune it, or excuse me, not prune it, thin it out by pulling the dead leaves off, some grass species will have a mat that forms at the base. It gets taller, it may die out in the center. Things like Fakahatchee, vetiver will do this. And so you can prune them back or clean dead growth out. I do it with a hard rake. I will rake my ornamental grasses and it's fantastic. It gets the dead leaves off. I don't have to cut them back. I do this after things are done pupating for the winter and things might not be hibernating in there. But a lot of times just going through with gloved hands, if they're not sharp, or a rake will help as far as that making it look uniform. You can absolutely prune to just make it look better if that's what you want. A good reason not to prune would be to leave that winter interest. It leaves habitat and hiding places and refuge for pollinators, for wildlife, for all kinds of critters. Again, if that's not your thing, cutting it back is just fine, but just know that you don't have to. That's not required. For folks who like to prune or divide their grasses to promote a healthier crown, dividing is completely different from pruning. If you dig up your plant, chop it into bits and replant it, that's dividing. And many grasses do great and need that every few years to be as healthy as possible. If you do want to prune it just before or with that new regrowth. When that new growth flushes out, whether it's in the springtime for evergreens or when it's gone dormant and you see those first shoots of green start to push up, that's when you want to prune. If you prune too early, what can happen is if we get a late freeze or a hard freeze, that dead foliage is going to help protect that growing point, the crown, and any new shoots that pop up, along with anything that might be taking refuge in there over the winter. But if you prune too early, just like any other plant, that new growth might die back. You might risk a late freeze damaging it if that's a concern for your grass. Okay, I'm done on pruning. Any last thoughts on pruning before I move on? I think I addressed everybody. Yeah, HOA, a lot of clients will think they look unattractive or too messy when they get dormant or they start to flop, and that's a valid reason in a managed landscape to prune. Variety doesn't need to be pruned. Oh, I forgot the most important reason to prune. Okay, sometimes grasses will get pests, mealybugs, rust, an infestation of spittlebugs, whatever, lubbers. You might want to prune just to get rid of everything. And I've had stands of muley that are literally next to each other in the same landscape. One gets mealybugs regularly, the other does not. And we prune them both just to keep it consistent. I prefer to do that rather than spray, because a lot of times, unless you're using a strong spray of water, pardon me, anything you spray, they're just going to come back. If you do prune, technically you can prune like an inch or half an inch to the crown. Most people will prune 3 to 4 inches just for ease of pruning. If you have hedge trimmers or something, it's easier to prune that way without damaging the crown of the plant. But most of the time, if you're going to prune an ornamental grass, you can prune down to 4 to 6 inches. Sometimes with those big old clumps like you see in the picture, they get really dense, and unless you have a sawzall or something that's pretty sturdy, it can be difficult to prune that low. But again, it's for aesthetics. The plant itself is going to be growing from that base. You're going to see some new leaves shoot up from the center of those leaf stalks, but again, the push is coming from the bottom there. If a grass is taking over or getting too big, yes, divide it, thin it, dig it up and replant it as a piece, but just cutting part of it off, pruning those leaves off isn't going to help you because they're just going to continue to grow. Okay, fertility or fertilization, you don't need to fertilize ornamental grasses. You just don't. Most will do fine. I've done the old blue water spray, I've put slow release fertilizer, I've added compost at the planting hole. That being said, if a grass tells you do not fertilize it, it needs low fertility, don't fertilize it. It needs low fertility. If you put extra nitrogen on it, it may not survive. So believe it or not, you can over fertilize an ornamental grass, unlike some of our turf grasses that seem like you can just fertilize them forever, even though you can't and you're not supposed to. Ornamental grasses do not need much fertilizer at all. If you are going to fertilize them, slow release, less than a pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square foot per year. I would make sure you fertilize in the spring before our rains start and as they start to sprout. Most of them, once they get going, are drought tolerant. So again, know your site. But if you are dealing with most of our grasses are going to be drought tolerant, even if they will tolerate wet feet. Exceptions are things like even Chasmanthium, which like shade and wet feet will tolerate some drought. Pests are minimal. Again, as I mentioned, most of the key pests are things like mealybugs. You will have some aphid damage, spittle bugs, lubbers, grasshoppers, herbivory, things like browse from deer and other browsing herbivores. But relatively speaking, most pests on grasses are minimal. We will occasionally have a rust that will come through and decimate, a particular type of miscanthus in the landscape. But you're not going to see the same types of pests on our ornamentals typically as you would on turf grass by any stretch of the imagination. They do vary with species though. So maintenance considerations, again, plan for those seed heads. I mentioned some people like that winter interest. This is river oats on the left in a container. This is here on campus in our courtyard. And I leave this to collect the seeds for my propagation class, but also because it's really cute in the wintertime. Again, some people think this is really unattractive and they would prune this or get rid of it. And that's fine, it's an aesthetic preference. You can see in the center picture here, this is part of our foodscape we used to have behind Fifield Hall. This is just regular oats, Avena sativa, the kind of oats we make oatmeal out of. But those can be really attractive as well in a landscape, even though it's technically a food crop. It's also a really attractive ornamental plant, and they, sensory engagement, they look really nice. And here we have the flowers on Fakahatchee grass. So typical grass flower, if you will, seed, but very different aesthetic appearances and different functions depending on where you're using it. As I mentioned, if you are going to divide your grasses, you can divide them for maintenance, for appearance, to keep them smaller or tidier. If you want to propagate them, you can't propagate a grass from a leaf cutting, obviously, but you can absolutely divide it up and replant a chunk of it. For most of our ornamental grasses, even if you plan for maturity and they grow to their mature size and they're fine in the landscape, after a few years for our perennials, you're going to still need to plan on thinning them, dividing them, and replanting the clumps, or just replacing them. They're not, some grasses are long-lived, but most grasses aren't going to live longer than a decade or so before they start to either be overgrown or kind of reach the end of their lifespan. We do have exceptions, and we've got two very different maintenance and site requirements here. This is from Dr. Mac Thetford. He's got a great photo of a chorus sweet flag on a water side. This is one of the plants we use a lot in rural areas or bioswales. The photo on the right is a sidewalk edge, and it's directly across from a xeriscaped or a desert landscape succulent garden. And it does a really nice job of softening both that hardscape landscape and also reflecting and kind of drawing the eye down to look at those succulents. So regardless of your setting, if they're in the right spot, they should be relatively low maintenance. A word on maintenance and dividing. This is the same plant, lemongrass, about 3 years apart. And I mentioned my cat loves, this is actually the neighbor's cat, loves to eat the lemongrass. That's my tortoise, who also loves to eat the lemongrass. But I'm not mentioning this for the plant or for the animals, it's for the plant. The lemongrass here is the same plant. I planted it as a single 1 gallon plant. I haven't done anything to it except occasionally rake out the dead leaves. The cat likes to chew on it, but you can see what happens when it's not divided. This is the same, about the same time of year. Yeah, this is a little bit later, the one on the left. But it's continued to grow, but it's, instead of being one single plant in the center one died out. There's now 2 on the side, and there's kind of a dead area in the center. So the grass by itself has propagated itself into 2 clumps, and I imagine as it continues to grow, it'll kind of do that itself and make 4 and 6. If I wanted to manage this landscape, 4 and 8, if I wanted to manage this a little bit better, I could have dug it up, divided it, replanted it, and then moved that clump somewhere else. So if you leave them alone, they're not necessarily gonna, do fantastic or do terribly, but there are some things to consider depending on what type of grass it is that you're kind of leaving it. All right, we're about out of time. I am going to click really quickly through some grass species. You can look all of these up. So I'm not going to talk too much about them, but I'm just going to mention them really quickly. Any questions on maintenance or culture, kind of before I do a little showcase of some favorite grasses of mine? And I'll pause at the very end for questions too, for big questions. I see some, are there any common pests referring, yeah, ornamental grass, we talked about that. Some plants that might attract birds. Some of these are deer resistant. Okay. Yes, so birds, anything that's going to fruit or provide, like sometimes you'll see them attracted to nesting material. So I know Fakahatchee birds are attracted to the fruit of. There's oats, the Chasmanthium, I've seen them forage there, millet, things like that. But look in that Florida friendly plant list, select wildlife, and I bet you'll see some ornamental grasses that pop up in that list. Deer resistant, that vetiver, maybe lemongrass because it's fragrant, but if the cats eat it, I bet the deer would too. Okay, put your questions in the chat. Yes, read before you buy. We all know muley. Oh, and if I don't have a photo cited, it's probably mine, but if it's yours and the credit got deleted, please tell me so I can credit you appropriately. We know muley grass, great plant. Oh, I apologize for that. There's an example of a pink variety. We've talked about the white. There's Elliott lovegrass, Eragrostis elliotii. Great native, white foliage, stays nice and compact. The foliage looks like a little mist over the flowers look like a little mist over foliage. A lot of the miscanthuses, this is the first grass I really fell in love with because there were so many cultivars. I was working up in Atlanta doing landscape design and working at a nursery. And then when I did the trial gardens down here in Florida, I was like, send me all the miscanthus because there's literally hundreds of cultivars and miscanthus, and many of them do fine here in Florida. This one I loved, she's cosmopolitan. Not my photo, but you can see the leaf variegation there. This is a little bit taller variety, has that great miscanthus plume. Our native Fakahatchee grass. I like the full size a little bit better than the dwarf. I just think it's showier and a little prettier, but if you need a small grass, the dwarf does great. Trypticum floridana. Dactyloides is bigger. Again, I love this grass, year-round interest, evergreen for me, and it does attract wildlife, so including snakes in a good way. Some plants that are a little bit more new or people may not know as well. This has been around, but folks still overlook this. Emerald goddess liriope. Some people don't like liriope. This one's different. The flowers are held inside the foliage, so it's very cute and tidy. It tends to have a little bit larger leaf blade and a little darker green. I really like Emerald Goddess. Excuse me, Carly Rose Pennisetum. This has a really attractive kind of pinkish tail to it. It's used a lot here on campus now. I've seen it in some managed landscapes, along with other Pennisetum varieties like tall tails. This is a really nice one that's a lot taller, has a long plume. This was really slow for us to establish, but once it did great. I think there's still kind of one rogue plant on the UF campus somewhere. This plant I loved, Gray Skies, interesting flower. It stayed kind of a brownish color tan, but I thought it was really unique. Relatively compact, only about 1 foot to 2 feet tall. Obviously the flowers make it a little taller, but those tan plumes are really striking, especially in some landscapes. Little bunny, this is one of my favorite, I love miniature plants. This is about 10 to 12 inches tall, but the flowers are very cute. They're only a couple inches long. They're really light color, very cute little plant. Compact habit, another Pennisetum or fountain grass. And this is plants that I love that we just don't see often enough. I've talked about it probably ad nauseum at this point, but river oats, our native Chasmanthium latifolium, great plant. Works well in a lot of different varieties. Sorry, all my allergies are kicking in. Sand cordgrass, Spartina bakeri, Spartina patens are two cord grasses. If you live in an area where these have been used in a lot of swales or roadside plantings, you're going to go, Erin, these are used so much. I hate these, or I've seen them everywhere. The DOTs use them. Yes, and a lot of homeowners don't know about it. So if you're not familiar with cordgrass or Spartina, check them out. Very soft texture, great fine texture, fast grower. They fill in and they do really well. Another Eragrostis that isn't as well known. I don't believe it's native, and this isn't my picture. I apologize. It's very pixelated, but I couldn't find one that shows how cool it is when it's established that I had taken. Eragrostis curvula, it looks, some people call it ponytail grass. It makes a really soft, tufted mass planting. Fantastic grass for large kind of mass plants or mass groups. This plant is used, that's my friend Kat, there in the photo for scale. This I love seeing as a bamboo substitute. It also does great in waterway plantings, will do fine in sun or shade. Tiger grass, Thysanolania maxima. This plant is super, and it's another one that's difficult to find. If you find someone growing it, buy it, and if you don't want it, I'll take it. But we'll encourage the people to grow it. Great large tan plumes, not freeze tolerant, but does fantastic from Gainesville south. Similarly, Vetiver decisionoides, this is a really popular grass in Asia. It's used for storm bank stabilization, soil erosion, or excuse me, slope stabilization, stormwater treatments. The roots themselves are medicinal and fragrant. It's used for fragrance. This is a really interesting grass. Again, back to that availability point, it's difficult to find, but once you have it, it's very easy to take care of. That being said, it's very deep rooted. It is used to stabilize riverbanks. So the roots are really well established. They grow deep. I would not put this by like a sensitive planter area or an area where you have like a septic tank or something like that. But great plant otherwise. Pink foliage, or excuse me, pink flowers, fragrant, really attractive. Okay, that's my whirlwind tour through some key grass species. I'm right at 11 o'clock. So my take summary, hopefully you've come to realize grasses aren't just for the north. They're not just for dry, hot areas. We've seen some that are all over, that are good for all over the place, but some are just for the north. So be mindful of what will grow here and what's invasive, what's appropriate for Florida. Most grasses are easy once you know what they need. So if you give them the site requirements they need, almost always they're going to be easy to grow. Low maintenance plants for your managed landscapes require very few inputs, whether it's maintenance, pesticides, labor, headache, 3 a.m. worrying about the plant time. Grasses are not that plant. There's a ton to choose from. There's a lot of different varieties, forms, things like that. Most of them are very attractive. They're versatile. You can do a lot with them. And make sure you keep an eye out for those hidden gems. If you see something you haven't seen before, ask. It might be invasive, it might be the next problem plant, but chances are it's just a cool plant you don't know about yet. I wanted to leave you all with a few resources. In the last slide, I'll have my email. But some fantastic resources on ornamental grasses. I mentioned that Florida-friendly plant guide. Again, I don't have the link up here, but you can Google it if you don't already have it bookmarked. You can just select ornamental grasses, and you will find a grass that fits your site. There's a fantastic EDIS publication from our very own Dr. Mac Thetford and Mary Salinas, and that talks about most everything I covered in this presentation, but a little bit more in depth. There's also some great charts and tables at the end with some species selection guides. Dr. Thetford also has a website that's a nice narrative kind of on ornamental grass overview. And then I mentioned Rick Dark's Color Encyclopedia of Ornamental Grasses. It's Timber Press. I don't get like a, royalty on this book. It's just a really handy reference if you're interested in ornamental grasses. And all of, obviously, our EDIS database, Solutions for Your Life, Florida Friendly. We have some fantastic advice out there on how to use ornamental grasses in your landscape, whether it's professional managed or backyard home or container garden. So thank y'all so much. I know I talk fast. Thank you for staying with me. If you have questions, I will stick around. Please email me. My email's up there. It's erinalvarez@ufl.edu. And I will pause for questions and Tom. Thank you again. I hope you'll have a great afternoon.
Erin, thank you so much. You covered a lot. And, during the introduction, I said that, they would learn a lot about how to select and how to use grasses. My goodness, you covered the gambit. One of the questions that I saw come in was, will the slides be available? Like all of our webinars, we do record them and they'll be posted to the website. And one of the nice things is you can always go back as a refresher, and you might think, oh, I remember Erin saying something about that, and you can always go back and watch her again. So she's fun to listen to, and she's full of great information. So if you had to select one, what's your favorite?
My favorite?
Would that be Chasmanthium?
Oh, it's going to be a tie between Chasmanthium and Thysanolania. I love tiger grass so much, but
I
not
know you do.
Yeah, I love that grass.
I still have a piece of it.
Oh, yay!
But yeah, it's that's big and bold.
It is, and I'm big and bold, so it works out. But yeah, the Chasmanthium is that's my everyday favorite for sure.
Very nice.
How about you,
I
Tom?
don't see any unanswered questions at this point in time. You did such a great job fielding all the questions, and thank you for following along. I said, okay, am I going to need to write that one down and ask her later? And no, you answered them all. You did such a great job. Thank you, Erin, so much.
Thank you,
everybody. Just a reminder, we do have we've got another one of the of our webinars coming up next month. And again, just to remind you of the date, that's September 12th. And that's with Dr. Bill Kern. That's 10 o'clock Eastern time. Please join us. Please make sure you remember to fill out your evaluations. It does help us when we're planning for next year. Everybody, thank you so much. Erin, thank you again one more time. And everybody have a great day.
Thank you.